Hello and welcome back to our recurring series where we speak to customer success leaders about excellence in customer success. My name is Alex Farmer, the founder of Customer Success Excellence, the world's first awards program dedicated to the customer success profession. I'm delighted to have Graham Gill, my good friend, rejoin our conversation. We spoke last year in advance of the 2022 EMEA Customer Success Excellence Awards. And here we are, just under a year later, talking in advance of the 2023 Americas Awards. You can join us May 17th in San Francisco to see the winners awarded live. I hope you'll be there. Graham, I know you will be there. And without further ado, let me allow you to introduce yourself to our audience. Who are you and what do you do?
Well, thank you, Alex, for having me back on the show. I'm really excited about this second annual awards.
Cheers.
Congratulations on everything you've been doing. As Alex mentioned, my name is Graham Gill. I'm the Chief Customer Officer and US GM of Precursive. Precursive is a Salesforce ISV, and I give you the marketing spiel, but if you care about time, dollars, and resources, and you're on Salesforce, I can help you.
Very good. And I will give you the marketing spiel by saying I am a former user. Not because we can't, I moved companies, and we're having a conversation, but a former user and a current fan of Precursive as well. And congratulations, Graham, to you for having the world's longest job title.
Yes.
How does that make you feel?
Well, I asked for more shares, but they actually just gave me an additional title. So that's part of my negotiation. I love it, Alex.
You're a good negotiator. I'm sure each of those individual characters was worth a lot. So congratulations to you. Let's shift gears to, I'm sure it was. Let's shift gears to a more serious topic about excellence in customer success. We last year spoke a lot about this idea of the echo chamber, the same voices reverberating around our space, saying, frankly, sometimes the same things they said 5 years ago, and it not being particularly helpful in advancing our function. Now, if I can get onto my marketing spiel quickly, customer success excellence exists to reward the real deserving voices. Who are the operators that spend more time executing and less time on LinkedIn? How can we recognize their voices and amplify them to move our profession forward? So let's first define excellence in CS, and then we can talk a little bit about if things have truly changed since we spoke last year. But what does excellence in customer success look like for you?
I think this is a really loaded question, and you knew you were going to get a weird answer from me on this. But ultimately, I think we are still talking in the echo chamber. We are still fighting the reverberation of recycled thoughts. But I really think that excellence in customer success really is taking it from a day-to-day, like individual practitioner to a more organizational philosophy. And one of the things I like about what you're doing with your award show is you're highlighting some of those folks that are maybe just to the left or the right of the norm. And really trying to push customer success deeper, not only into their portfolio of clients, but also within their organization. So to answer the question directly, Alex, it's really just taking it from this more of a philosophy, academic, to putting it into actual practice.
Yeah. And I had one of our judges describe one of the nominations for the Customer Success Leader of the Year award as a business leader who happens to be in customer success. And I thought that was a really interesting way to articulate what excellence in CS looks like, right? We take it from a philosophy or take it from an individual mission and combine those things into a company mission or a company deliverable, let's say.
That's a really good way to put it. Let me ask you a question. Hopefully you'll allow me to ask a question back at you.
Permission granted.
Do you think customer success, obviously you are also a chief customer officer. Congratulations on your new role that you're really jumping into. Do you think customer success has gone into, going from the traditional account management into customer success? Do you start, when you talk with your peers, are you starting to see it become more of a organizational, operational philosophy? Because I actually think that's where it should go.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think I would also say my job title, Graham, is CCO because I gave them back letters for more shares. So I think did the reverse of agree. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You missed the mark on that one, indeed.
Yeah.
But yes, no, I part of the reason I joined the company is because the organization is a customer-led organization, a customer-led growth company from the ground up. The CEO is a huge proponent. The sales team is focused on new customer acquisition. Our pricing model is usage and consumption based. So when my team focus, it's a commercial CS team, but when we focus on adoption, the revenue follows, which is a perfect alignment for CS to take revenue and grow value hand in hand. But that's, pricing is an organizational company-wide decision. The investment in product-led growth and some of the digital CS techniques we're doing means that the product drives customer success. And we're also, as an engineering organization, building out a dashboard suite for our product. It's a travel tech platform that quantifies and embeds business ROI metrics directly in the product. And those are all other functions that are doing outcome-based, value-based things that make it easier for us as CS leaders to not have to fly the flag for our department, but really to get the benefits of the company adopting that organizational philosophy. So I think, let's maybe tie it also to today's economic climate, whatever word you want to use for it. The companies that do that investment organizationally will win, and the companies that don't, we'll see where they go in a year, right? I think it's high time. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that I think, my non-expert opinion, you are probably in the minority in terms of like an organization that really buys into it. We always hear about, this is a customer-centric organization, and respectfully, I have no idea what that means. I think that's just a tagline. Now, what you did is you broke down each individual operational areas of the organization and tied it back to customer success. That's where customer success truly is going to win and continue to drive value, not only for prospects, but for current clients, for shareholders, and for employee satisfaction.
Completely. And I think, maybe in generation one or decade one of customer success, we had these relentless energizer bunnies that got ground into a pulp because they had to build the CS function. And then in their free time, they had to get the organization to think like a customer-led company. And if they couldn't do both well, they maybe were said, you know what, we don't need customer success, or what, we're going to make a change here. And in some ways, it was an impossible task. Revenue leaders, CROs, don't come in and, with the exception of small startups, they don't come in and, build a transition to a sales funnel. The sales funnel is there. You might need to fine tune it, but it exists. But when we say, actually, we're building customer success from scratch at a company that's been around for a long time, we're building it from the ground up, right? And I think I guess my point is the starting point to the finish line is very wide for the CS function, but then you also have to go out and influence the rest of the organization. That's a 5-year job, not a 5-month job. And I think people maybe haven't been given enough time. And I think that's part of the reason we see some companies making, I would argue, a short-sighted decision to say that it was an experiment that they want to move away from, or, other things like that.
I also think that I agree with you 100%. I also, it's not an easy job. Customer success by nature, it's a meat grinder, right? And I think you have to have stamina. You have to play the long game. You have to understand that it's not just, shape shifting your prospects and your clients, but it's also your internal organization. One of the stripes that I often see is around the topic of revenue. Who owns revenue? And it sometimes becomes an us versus them. So you mentioned the CRO, you mentioned the CCO, maybe you have a head of operations, whoever it is, right? I actually, and I've said this before, you and I've talked about it, I do believe someday that the CCO could own revenue within an organization. I think that we are in a period of time where customer success doesn't quite know where it's going to go next. And I think if we can somehow bridge the gap to owning revenue across an organization, you're going to see customer success. I hate to say this, I'm going to wash my mouth out with soap, like have the seat at the table, right? Like that's what you hear a lot in the echo chambers. Like, why don't we have a seat at the table? Why don't we answer the fundamental question of who owns the operational revenue within an organization, and how is it being dispersed across all the other departments, tying back to the key KPIs and then moving forward?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And I actually saw somebody last week with the job title of Chief Revenue and Customer Officer. So the CRCO is getting there, maybe. And, I think there's also something to be said, let's give our colleagues in sales some credit. I think as technology like, forecasting tools, AI being applied to forecast intelligence, the gongs and courses of the world that, analyze there's technology that's being applied, and the old school salesperson that's all kind of relationship based that frankly doesn't necessarily do a great job doing post-sale work, which is much more value-centric and needing to get into the detail, that CRO, that generation of CRO might look more like a CCO looks today as well. So I think there's a meeting in the middle here between a more customer-centric revenue leader and a more revenue-centric customer leader, where maybe it becomes one. And the let's say the older generation of both sides kind of moves out to make room for that CRCO type persona.
I'm going to have to go and see if I can get that added onto my my title.
Yeah.
Go for a third
Exactly.
one. But you bring up a really interesting point. If I think about what you just mentioned, and you also, if going back to the sort of the economic and the environmental turmoil that we're in right now, I do believe that the transactional show up, try to sell something, rinse, repeat. I think that the sales cycles in all products are getting longer. Even some of the PLG, sign up, convert, it's taking longer. People's time is more, they just don't have the time to like invest in a lot of these things. It is a long game, which is a relationship game. And I think sales is starting to figure out what customer success has known for a while, is that it does take time. It's not what you're doing next week. It's where your company, and I've said this a million times, in 6, 9, 12, 18 months, that's really going to play. So now let's tie that back into customer centricity across an organization and focusing on revenue and the growth of the organization, not us versus them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, CS is guilty of participating in that reductivist debate, and it serves no one, right? I want to ping shit. Let's get the bleep button ready. Got to ping stuff over the fence and say, that's sales fault. They sold a bad customer. That's not ICP. I'm mad. We got to think a little bigger than that, right? The business might decide to acquire a non-ICP customer to hit a number. Mm-hmm. That's a business decision. Now, if they make that decision too often, that's a business problem. But if I make that decision, it's a trade-off. Everything is a trade-off. So yes, the cost to serve that customer will be higher. Yes, they might be a churn risk in a year, but to get to my next tranche of funding or to, land in a new market, that's a business decision that needs to be made. But we have to be able to look our sales colleagues in the eye and say, I understand that business decision. But they also need to look us in the eye and say, hey, I know this is going to cause a little bit of pain. Here's the reason why we're doing it. Let's agree on that together. But right now it's like this, bad fit customer, they churned, but it's not that simplistic. And I think we just really need to continue to evolve the nuance maybe in our and the kind of, again, the business acumen in our function.
I think also what's going to help alleviate some of that us versus them strife is having folks like yourself, myself, who have had different roles in the organization can empathize, right? So I'm a failed sales leader, right? We've talked about that before. I understand that we have to sell to grow, and sometimes you sneak one or two by, but let's have that conversation. Let's have that understanding. It's going to be a give or take. So if I push back hard from a CCO perspective at some point, it's because we've gotten these other ones and we've sort of moved past that. And I don't think those honest conversations happen. You have commissions involved, you have egos involved, you have a whole organizations maybe don't know how to have that conversation.
Yeah. Well, and also, and I also think there's a lack of parity between your traditional CRO and your traditional CCO or VP revenue, or VP sales, VP CS. Or because CS is such a new function, and maybe a lot of those people came out of support or implementation and are kind of building their commercial acumen as they go, the parity is a CRO that's been doing it for 20 years and a CCO that's been doing it for 7 years. So that, even those debates are not going to, there's almost an inferiority complex maybe with our function that kind of gets into our skin a little bit and causes us to make these confrontational, maybe I'm just speaking for myself now, but confrontational.
No, I agree. But can I ask a really serious question? At what point do we stop saying CS is new?
Good question. I mean, not now because I just said it, but maybe right after this.
Right, like what I've been doing it 10 years. You've been doing it 10 years. I mean, that's a decade.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think the subscription economy, maybe has been around for 30 years, 25 years. I don't know. I mean, it's maybe it's a crutch that we rely too much on. I think though that, if you think about and I'm gonna hope what I am about to say is supported by facts. Otherwise you can get in the comments and attack me. But, your CS leader is usually younger with less years of experience. because they, and the reason that I think that's the case more generally is because it was an avenue for me when I was starting my career. Whereas for those folks that were starting their career a longer time ago, or maybe a CRO, they went into sales, they went into SDR, they went into customer client services. And those were the two functions, right? So I guess, you start your career on a rung on a ladder, and that ladder is a longer tenure than the one that CS has been in. But I think it's a good point, it's not new per se, it's just younger. But I guess if we always look back and use that as our crutch, we're not going to go beyond where we are today.
I actually, and look, this is going to pay me to give you the credit and the accolades on what you just said, but that was actually a really interesting thought that I've never had. Is we often talk about like getting experience in different roles at different levels, getting your teeth kicked in, all that fun stuff. You actually pointed out, if you have a very tenured CRO, we'll use them as the counterpoint, and you have someone that's on their first, second, third job who is now a director or VP of customer success, going toe to toe with them, there is, rightly or wrongly, that intimidation factor. Do I belong at the table? The self-doubt comes in, and then almost you get steamrolled, and then all of a sudden CS in your organization is discredited, right? Like, I'm fortunate enough at Precursive, I have an equal seat at the table with our CTO, our CFO, our CEO, and we respect each individual direction we're coming from. I don't think that's the case in a lot of organizations.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I will gladly take that credit you gave me and quote you for the rest of your life. So thank you for that,
Please.
Graham. Much appreciated. Let's go ahead and shift gears briefly. I want to talk, we talked a little bit about this already, but let's talk about the other, we talked about revenue ownership and kind of, sharper elbows to get space in the room. But what other qualities or characteristics do you think are critical for a world-class CS professional?
Being able to error handle, things come up, being able to logically think, being able to deflect. Again, I've been saying the same thing for many years, so this is not like revolutionary or groundbreaking. You have to be able to have a conversation. You have to find the lowest common denominator in the group setting and be able to communicate to understand. I think one of the greatest things, and I'm guilty of not always doing this, is shutting the hell up. So asking a question, and you and I have great rapport. We can go on for hours doing this, but coming into a conversation and being able to listen, I think, is a huge benefit for a characteristic of a quality customer success practitioner.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think similar. We're not dissimilar. And I think, for me, shutting the hell up and listening is yes, my wife, I'm not doing it very well, but for the most part is, a skill that I've had to work on. But I think one of the ways, actually, and just to maybe get a little personal, but active listening is speaking. And let's not quote me on that, because that doesn't make any sense. But when you say something and I say back to you what I think I heard, that's actually quite a good, that's how I do it, because I'm somebody who likes to talk and not just, I'm an extrovert. So when you say something, I say, okay, what I'm hearing is this. Is that right? And that I think is a way to almost turn the proclivity to speak into a listening motion. At least that's has been helpful for me. I would say a year ago and more recently, I was terrible at it until then, I think. But
I often get a lot of crap from my team and from my friends and even my family. I try to when I say that lowest common denominator, I try to use analogies. A lot of them are terrible. But just to make sure, instead of saying, like, taking it, the old sales approach is, let me feed this back to you and make sure I have it right. I actually like to use an analogy to try to compare and contrast and make sure that, and I use that as a way personally to try to get more out of the story.
Yes.
To make sure that I'm understanding correctly. I'm looking to see if the person I'm talking to has thought about, like, what happens if that doesn't go right. Like, so that's one of the things I do, and I've picked that up from people who I've worked with in the past, who are really, really good at just like regurgitating it back, but getting more out of it.
Yeah. No, I like that. I like that a lot. We've already talked a little bit about where CS will be in the next couple of years. Anything you want to add about the future of CS, either where it will be or where it needs to go?
I said this last time we talked, and even in some of our other personal conversations, I still think that CS needs to mature. And I don't mean like 15 years, 20 years. I think we need to elevate the game that we bring. I still think that a majority of organizations do not put CS as an equal. I think it's getting better, but I
Yeah.
think in the next 5 years, we need to make sure that we are arming our practitioners with the ability to, I don't want to say force their way, but to actually find the way to have that equal seat at the
Yeah.
table.
Yeah, and I think, let's also look at ourselves, right? I think, yeah, I was I'm hiring a head of CS at the moment. And I was interviewing some folks, and it's interesting to hear, some folks will join a company and then have a very short tenure and leave because this the culture is not customer centric, and the company values means we send an NPS survey once a year, right? And that clearly is not good enough. It's not even scratching the surface. And I think it's on us also to ask the right questions as CS leader. I think as the consensus becomes that CS needs to own revenue, right? That cuts out a lot of companies that are doing, the NPS survey, program creation,
Yeah.
all that. I'm going to say a bad word, kind of busy work that doesn't actually drive NRR directly. Yes, it might 7 degrees removed do something, but are we really, is my KPI the NRR number? And am I the one with my team that's negotiating those contracts to get there? Good. Now let's have a conversation, because I think, it's a double-edged sword. We can complain about it, but if we're not then in the interview process passing on these companies, and I appreciate in a time like this we take what we can get, but as we as CS leaders move forward, we also need to demand, I think, that organizations, hey, that's not a CS role. Thanks, but no thanks. That's that's a support role or something else, right?
Yeah, I mean, some folks will read about customer success in Business Week and then say that they need to have it. I mean, that's a great thing. If you're not tied to revenue, you've written about it, I've written about it. If you're not tied to revenue and you're calling yourself CS in 2023, you're probably in a little bit of trouble. It's the same thing that we saw when the pandemic started. The first people to get let go was customer success. Thought we were going to ride out the MQLs, the conversions, that dried up. Same thing, it's repeating itself. You have to be tied to revenue if you're in any sort of customer centric organization.
I think you're right. And the one thing that I see, here's my hope. Let's maybe conclude talking about the future a little bit. My hope is, so companies, let's talk about pricing. I mentioned it earlier when you were the interviewer and I was the interviewee. Great job, by the way. I think you have a future sitting on this side of the Zoom meeting. The pricing matters, right? Because the unit economics of the agreement make a huge difference as to whether it's a new sales motion or whether it's natural expansion, whether I can just click a button in the product or I got to go call somebody and they got to go talk to procurement. All of those things, those dynamics change how CS and commercial ownership work well together or don't. And I think my hope is in this economic climate where at least software companies that sell to other software companies, everybody's cutting heads. So the seat-based license model clearly is not going to be, my hope is we get away from seat-based licensing and we move more to consumption and usage. And when we do, at least my experience in my current company is it's so much easier to have that commercial conversation, because if I can make you insanely successful with my product, you come to me. Think about it. It's inbound versus outbound. It's not, hey, you want to buy this new thing? It's, oh, you are at a cap and you really need this to drive more ROI for your business. Let me create the order form. So I think if we can look at a silver lining here, maybe we simplify and remove friction, remove sales friction from the expansion motion, and then CS leaders have an easier time owning that number.
100%. But think about where pricing has come, right? With PLG and with the consumption models. I mean, pricing in many organizations is still like a haphazard, half-assed product marketing exercise that's sort of like, oh, that seems like this is our new pricing. But what you're talking about is revolutionizing, and look, I'll give you credit for it because you said it here. It's changing the lens in which you approach pricing with being customer centric and removing barriers all in the same thought. Like that does not happen. I've sat in a lot of pricing exercises over my tenure, and it doesn't work like that.
And here's the challenge, because essentially what we're doing is we're paying, it's outcome-based pricing. If I can make you successful with the thing that you bought the product for, I will get money, right? If you don't have a good CS function to drive outcomes, you don't want to make that leap because you're going to lose money, right? It's a bit chicken and the egg. But if I do, then I will make that leap because I'll make more money. So which one is going to come first? And I hope together they can move in that direction, because it would certainly, simplify things for customers and simplify things for CS leaders as well. But 2 to 5 years from now, Graham, when we have our next conversation, let's talk about it. Let's look back and we can see how correct we were.
you know, as we finish up here, you're actually walking into what I've been saying, whether you meant to or not. CS will operationalize the organization, and it will become that philosophy, and that's where you'll start to see, like, everything we just talked about. That's the CCO going from, like, hey, I'm you know, customer centric, this and that, to actually helping, running, and influencing and working with other peers within the organization from first outreach all the way to renewal.
Yeah, absolutely. Unifying that journey, right? And removing that friction. What a good way to conclude here. I will see you, Graham, in San Francisco, and I hope to see you in San Francisco as well, May 17th, awarding the winners, who I'm sure are doing a much better job than we just talked about. And we'll be able to learn from them, which of course is the whole reason we exist at Customer Success Excellence. So I'll see you in a couple of weeks in San Francisco. I hope you'll join us here in the audience. And thanks for joining us today.
Alex, thank you very much for your time. Always good to connect.